What if the creatures you've heard about in bedtime stories were never meant for children? Goblins that haunt the shadows, fairies who curse as often as they bless, elves born from ancient gods, not toys or tricksters, but beings that once ruled the fears and imaginations of entire civilizations. These aren't just fantasy tropes or cartoon characters. These are echoes of something older, darker, etched into the very roots of human storytelling. Across cultures and continents, humans have described astonishingly similar beings. Spirits in the forest, monsters under bridges, invisible watchers who demand respect, long before Hollywood glamorized them and fairy tales softened their edges. These creatures served a different purpose. They were guides, protectors, omens, and sometimes punishers. In this journey through ancient folklore, we'll uncover the real stories behind goblins, fairies, trolls, elves, and spirits. You'll discover how these beings shaped cultural identities, guarded sacred spaces, and blurred the line between the human world and the unknown. We'll also explore surprising parallels across cultures that never met, revealing the universal fears and truths that bind us all. This is not just mythology. It's history wrapped in magic, truth disguised as legend. So if you've ever wondered whether there's more to folklore than fantasy, prepare to uncover the hidden truths behind the creatures that never really left us, because some stories are meant to be remembered. In the realm of ancient folklore, goblins are perhaps among the most misunderstood and misrepresented beings today. They're often seen as comic relief creatures in fantasy games and movies, small, bumbling, and mischievous. But this sanitized portrayal masks their much darker and more complex origins. In older traditions, goblins were manifestations of chaos, fear, and moral consequence. Beings who existed not just to trick, but to teach. To understand goblins, we must dig deep into the collective psyche of ancient societies, exploring the cultural contexts in which these beings emerged and what they truly represented. The etymological roots of a trickster. The word goblin first appeared in 14th century French as goblin and is thought to derive from the Latin golinus or the Greek kobalos, meaning rogue or knave. Interestingly, koalos also gives us the word kobold, a Germanic cousin of the goblin with similar attributes. In nearly every European culture, there is a version of the goblin, a small supernatural being who lives on the edges of human society, often in dark forests, caves, or even homes. These creatures are rarely benevolent and often delight in sowing confusion, stealing food, or leading travelers astray. But their behavior is not random. Goblins are often moral agents, enacting punishment for greed, disrespect, or laziness. In this way, they represent society's anxieties about the invisible forces that punish wrongdoing. Goblins across cultures, England and the Hobgoblin. In English folklore, goblins were known to haunt lonely places, steal food, and frighten travelers. But not all were malicious. Some, like the hobgoblin, were house spirits who could help with chores if treated well. If mistreated or disrespected, they could turn vengeful. Hobgoblins blurred the line between helper and tormentor, rewarding humility and punishing pride. Shakespeare's Puck from A Midsummer Night's Dream is perhaps the most famous hobgoblin. He's mischievous but not evil, a trickster who represents the unpredictability of the natural world and the folly of humans. Germany and the kobold. In German folklore, kobolds were underground spirits who haunted mines, ships, and homes. They could lead miners to veins of gold or cause cave-ins. Much like goblins, they demanded respect and offerings. If angered, they became dangerous, causing tools to vanish, fires to go out, or accidents to occur. One variation, the Hansel Mansion, were helpful house spirits in Cologne who completed chores at night until they were offended by curiosity and vanished forever. This story echoes a common theme in goblin lore. Helpful beings turn hostile when disrespected or when the veil of mystery is pierced. Scandinavia and the Nis. In Scandinavian countries, the En-Ortant was a goblin-like creature that lived on farms and acted as a guardian spirit. Wearing a red cap and beard, he was small and strong, often helping with farm work and protecting livestock. But he was temperamental. Forget to leave him a bowl of porridge on Christmas Eve, and he might wreak havoc. These stories weren't just quaint traditions, they were cultural practices. Leaving offerings for the nests was an important part of maintaining harmony with the unseen world. France and the Goblin. The French Goblins were malevolent spirits known for haunting specific places. One famous legend involves the Goblin of Evu, a dark, howling entity said to torment travelers. Unlike the sometimes helpful goblins of Northern Europe, these French versions were more purely malicious, reinforcing the belief that dark spirits were ever present in liminal spaces like roads, woods, and ruins. Eastern Europe, dwarves, gnomes, and forest spirits. Though not always called goblins, many Eastern European cultures had small subterranean creatures associated with the earth, metal, and mischief. In Slavic folklore, the domovoi was a house spirit that behaved much like a goblin, protective but easily offended. In Czech and Slovak tales, Skursad or Pramanik lived in mines and could either help or hurt miners. These beings often had domain over natural resources and household well-being. They weren't just random pests, they were enforcers of a moral order, rooted in respect for the unseen. Goblins as moral enforcers. Despite their unsettling traits, goblins were never purely evil. Instead, they acted as agents of cosmic justice. In societies where natural disasters, illness, and crop failures had no scientific explanation, people often turned to the supernatural for answers. Goblins provided a framework. Misfortune wasn't random, it was punishment for moral lapses. Stinginess might cause a goblin to steal your food. Laziness might make your tools disappear. Curiosity might scare away helpful spirits. Disrespect might lead to accidents or haunts. In this way, goblins serve a social purpose. They reinforce community values through fear and awe. They reminded people that even when no one else was watching, something was the goblin and the liminal. One of the most fascinating aspects of goblins is their affinity for liminal spaces. Goblins live underground in caves, forests, or abandoned buildings, places on the edge of civilization. They appear at night or during transitions like solstices or seasonal shifts. This positions them as guardians or gatekeepers between worlds. They are drawn to thresholds, doors, bridges, boundaries, crossroads, wells, and tunnels, abandoned or forgotten places. In mythological thinking, these locations are thin places where the veil between the human world and the spirit world is weakest. Goblins, like many trickster spirits, exploit these weaknesses. They live in the cracks between what is known and what is feared. Goblins and children, a cautionary relationship. Many traditional goblin stories are directed at children. Parents use them as cautionary tales to instill obedience and good behavior. In Wales, for example, goblins were said to steal naughty children or lead them into the woods, never to be seen again. In German folklore, goblins might cause nightmares or sit on your chest at night, possibly an early explanation for sleep paralysis. The goblin wasn't just a creature. It was a stand-in for all the dangers that children couldn't yet understand. By personifying fear and consequence, parents made abstract dangers feel concrete. Don't go into the woods becomes the goblins will get you. Goblins and greed. One recurring theme in goblin lore is greed. Goblins are often hoarders of treasure, but their gold is cursed. Those who try to steal from them are punished either by madness, misfortune, or a fate worse than death. This symbolism appears in stories like Rumpelstiltskin and The Goblin Market by Christina Rossetti, where deals with goblin-like figures always come with a hidden price. Goblins challenge the idea of unearned wealth or unchecked ambition. They are gatekeepers of hidden riches, but they demand humility, cleverness, and respect. Those who approach them with arrogance are inevitably punished. Christianity and the demonization of goblins. As Christianity spread across Europe, many folkloric beings, goblins included, were reinterpreted through a theological lens. Helpful house spirits became demons. Mischievous goblins were linked to the devil. The dualistic view of good versus evil left no room for morally ambiguous creatures. Medieval demonology classified goblins as minor demons who tempted humans into sin or caused spiritual harm. In some texts, goblins were associated with incubi, evil spirits who harassed people at night. This demonization changed how people viewed goblins. They were no longer cultural symbols of disorder and consequence. They became spiritual threats. Over time, their image was softened and commercialized. Especially in the 19th and 20th centuries, goblins in literature and pop culture. By the Victorian era, goblins were undergoing a transformation. Authors like George MacDonald, The Princess and the Goblin, and Christina Rossetti reimagined goblins as magical, mischievous beings, sometimes scary, sometimes sympathetic. The Industrial Revolution and Romanticism both contributed to a nostalgia for old folk tales, which were now seen as literary and cultural heritage. In the 20th century, J.R.R. Tolkien introduced goblins interchangeable with orcs as dark, corrupted beings. Modern fantasy followed suit. Dungeons and Dragons, Warcraft, and countless RPGs portrayed goblins as enemies to be defeated. Though they retained some trickster traits, their deeper cultural symbolism was often lost. Still, in stories like Harry Potter, Labyrinth, or the Spiderwood Chronicles, echoes of the old goblin archetype remain. Clever, secretive, morally complex. Goblins are more than just monsters. They are mirrors reflecting human fears of the dark, of disorder, of consequences we can't control. They serve as tricksters, teachers, and punishers in equal measure. In every tale where a goblin hides under the bed or guards a hidden treasure, we see a reflection of something deeper, our uneasy relationship with the unknown. To study goblins is to study the human mind, its shadow side, its superstitions, and its craving for meaning. As long as people fear what lies beyond the firelight, goblins will endure, not just in stories, but in the silent places where mischief, mystery, and magic still roam. Fairies, winged, whimsical, and enchanting, are among the most iconic figures in folklore. Yet beneath the glittering image lies a complex history filled with darkness, power, and contradiction. Far from being mere wish-granting sprites, traditional fairies were beings of immense mystery. They were as capable of cursing as they were of blessing, and often operated by their own alien code of ethics. To understand fairies is to unravel a tapestry of myth, fear, reverence, and imagination spanning cultures and centuries. The origins of the fairy mythos. The word fairy derives from the Old French fairy, which referred not to the beings themselves, but to the magical realm they inhabited. La fairy. Over time, it came to represent the beings of that otherworldly domain. The Latin root fatum fate suggests their connection to destiny, implying that fairies were not just magical but tied to cosmic forces. Early mentions of fairy-like beings go back to the pre-Christian Celtic world, where the owl sea people of the mounds were believed to inhabit a parallel realm under hills, lakes, or forests. These spirits were often considered fallen gods, deities pushed aside by new religious systems, but still powerful and deserving of respect. Appearance and behavior, beautiful yet alien. Traditional fairies were not always tiny winged creatures. In many legends, they were human-sized or taller with unearthly beauty and a cold, aloof demeanor. Their charm could hypnotize, their songs lure travelers into eternal sleep, and their feasts trap mortals in their realm forever. Their ethics differed vastly from humans. What seemed like a harmless jest to a fairy could ruin a human life. They punished rudeness or arrogance with brutal precision, yet rewarded kindness and respect in astonishing ways. This moral ambiguity is what made them both feared and venerated. The otherworld and fairy realms. Fairies were believed to reside in the otherworld, a mystical plane parallel to our own. This realm was sometimes accessed through natural features, stone circles, burial mounds, forests, and lakes, or through specific times like Beltane or Sin, when the veil between worlds thinned. Time flowed differently there. A night spent in a fairy realm could mean years had passed in the human world. This timelessness emphasized the danger and allure of fairy encounters. You might enter willingly, but you might never return the same. Cross-cultural variance. While the Celtic world popularized fairy beliefs, many other cultures have similar entities. In Norse mythology, the Alpha Elves were radiant beings connected to fertility, death, and magic. The Slavic Rusalka was a spirit of a drowned woman who could lure men to their doom with her song. Greek nymphs were divine spirits of nature residing in trees, rivers, and mountains. In Japan, Yokai such as the Kitsun fox spirit or Tengu behaved much like fairies, tricksters, or guardians with supernatural powers, despite their varied names and traits. These beings shared characteristics with Western fairies: moral ambiguity, links to nature, and the power to reward or destroy, dangerous deals, and fatal gifts. Fairies are known for striking bargains, but these deals often come with a hidden cost. The gift of fairy gold might turn to leaves by morning. A blessing might come with a curse. Mortals who fail to uphold their end of the bargain face terrible consequences. One famous tale is that of Thomas the Ryer, who was taken by the fairy queen and given the gift of prophecy at the cost of his freedom. For 7 years, in other stories, midwives who help fairy births are given sight into the other world, but must never reveal what they've seen. Fairy gifts symbolize the double-edged nature of magic. It can elevate or destroy depending on the recipient's wisdom. Changelings and infant theft. Perhaps one of the darkest aspects of fairy folklore is the belief in changelings. Fairy children swapped for human babies. In pre-modern Europe, sudden illness, developmental disorders, or unexplained behavior in children were often blamed on fairy abduction. The real child was believed to be taken to the other world and a sickly or deformed fairy child left in its place. Tragically, these beliefs led to the mistreatment or even death of children thought to be changelings. Yet, the stories also reflect a desperate attempt to explain the unexplainable in times of high infant mortality and limited medical knowledge, fairy taboos and protection. Fairies had rules and humans ignored them at their peril. Common taboos included never eating fairy food. It bound you to their realm. Avoiding fairy rings. Stepping inside could trap you in time. Not speaking of them openly. Calling them the good people or the folk instead. Never thanking a fairy. Gratitude was seen as rude or binding. To protect themselves. People carried iron which fairies feared, wore charms or left offerings of milk and bread. Rituals and prayers at liminal times of year were also common, especially around harvest or solstice. Christianization and the fairy demonization. With the rise of Christianity, fairy beliefs were either suppressed or reinterpreted. Some said fairies were angels who refused to choose sides in Lucifer's rebellion, neither good nor evil, and so doomed to dwell in liminal spaces. Others saw them as demons in disguise, seducing mortals away from God. Despite this, fairy beliefs persisted, especially in rural areas. They were woven into Christian holidays and local customs. The line between saint and spirit, miracle and magic, often blurred. Fairies in literature and pop culture. The Victorian era reimagined fairies as whimsical flower-dwelling miniatures, thanks in part to illustrators like Cicely Mary Barker and authors like J.M. Barrie. Peter Pan. This domestication of the fairy reflected a broader cultural shift. Magic became safe, sanitized, and fit for children. Yet older, darker portrayals endured. Yeats, Tolkien, and the Grimms preserved more menacing versions in contemporary media. From Pan's Labyrinth to Hellboy, The Witcher, and Jonathan Strange, and Mr. Norrell, fairies have returned to their mysterious, dangerous roots. Modern fantasy often reclaims the fairy as a morally ambiguous being, powerful, proud, and perilous. These are not sidekicks or sparkly friends. They are forces of nature with agendas of their own. Symbolism and meaning. Fairies embody contradiction. They are guardians of nature, yet deeply territorial and vengeful. Givers of gifts, but with hidden costs. Immortal, but incapable of human empathy. Beautiful but deadly, they serve as metaphors for the wild world. Enchanting but unpredictable. They are the soul of folklore itself, old, mysterious, and always just beyond reach. Elves are among the most enchanting, mysterious, and shape-shifting figures in global folklore. They have traveled through history wearing many masks, divine beings of Norse cosmology, feared spirits of medieval superstition, elegant immortals of modern fantasy, and cheerful toy makers of contemporary Christmas traditions. Each cultural moment has reshaped the elf, reflecting deep-seated human beliefs about nature, magic, morality, and imagination. This section explores the transformation of elves across time, from sacred figures to secular icons, revealing the threads that bind their story across myth, religion, and popular culture. Norse origins, the Alpha and the divine. In ancient Norse mythology, elves were known as Alf, not the diminutive, jolly creatures we think of today, but radiant, semi-divine beings. The Alf were associated with light, fertility, creativity, and even the afterlife. They resided in Alfheim, a realm gifted to the fertility god Fra, and were often considered lesser deities or spirits of nature. The Presetta written by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century differentiates between two major kinds of elves: looser, light elves, beautiful ethereal beings of light who dwelled in the heavens and were associated with purity and inspiration. Dalar, dark elves, mysterious shadowy beings who lived underground. Some scholars debate whether these were synonymous with dwarves. Known for their magical craftsmanship, elves in this period weren't just mythical. They were integral to cosmology. Offerings were made to elves at burial sites, and they were believed to influence human fate, both blessings and curses. The idea of elfshot, or mysterious sudden illnesses, may reflect how their presence was used to explain disease, especially in rural Norse communities, to Anglo-Saxon elves and medieval Christianity. As Norse culture spread into the British Isles, the elf figure blended with Anglo-Saxon and Celtic folklore. The Old English word elf was common in personal names like Alfric and Alfred, suggesting that elves were once thought to possess noble or sacred qualities. But the Christianization of Europe marked a profound shift. Elves began to be demonized or relegated to the realm of superstition. By the 10th century, elfshot was invoked in Anglo-Saxon medical texts to explain ailments caused by invisible arrows. Of elven origin, by the 13th century, elves were increasingly depicted as tricksters or even malevolent spirits. Some Christian legends claim they were the souls of the unbaptized dead or fallen angels. Neither good enough for heaven nor bad enough for hell. In this way, elves became liminal beings, trapped between worlds, morally ambiguous and spiritually dangerous. Folk remedies against elves emerged, including charms, prayers, and herbs. Iron was believed to repel them, as were church bells and crosses. These practices echo how traditional belief systems were synthesized with Christianity, not wholly replaced. 3. Elves and the other world. Throughout European folklore, elves were strongly associated with the other world, a parallel realm of spirits and mystery. This other world could be reached through fairy rings, mounds, forests, and certain seasonal thresholds like Sin or Midsummer. Elves were said to dance under the moonlight in sacred circles, abduct humans to their realm, leave changelings in place of stolen babies, bestow blessings or curses unpredictably. Time in the elf realm flowed differently. A night spent among them might mean years had passed in the human world, a motif shared in Celtic and Japanese folklore alike. Despite their dangers, elves retained a dual reputation. They could inspire artists and bless children, but also cause madness, misfortune, or death. This duality made them both feared and respected. 4. Romantic revival and Tolkien's elves. The 18th and 19th centuries brought a romantic revival of folklore across Europe. Writers and collectors like the brothers Grimm, Sir Walter Scott, and William Butler Yeats helped preserve traditional elven tales. Elves were no longer solely sinister. They were reimagined as wistful, beautiful beings closely tied to the soul of nature and poetry. But it was J.R.R. Tolkien who reshaped the image of the elf most significantly for modern culture. In The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien drew on Norse Alfr, Celtic city, and medieval angelology to construct his own elven races. Elves of Middle-earth were tall, immortal, wise, and tragic. They were guardians of ancient knowledge and natural beauty, yet they also bore the sorrow of a fading world full of loss and melancholy. Tolkien's elves were not mischievous sprites, but philosophical warriors and artists. This reimagining inspired generations of fantasy literature and set a new standard for how elves were portrayed. Noble, aloof, deeply spiritual. V. Santa's elves. Cheerful helpers or mythical outliers. In stark contrast to their ancient grandeur, elves also took on a very different role in the 19th and 20th centuries as Santa's helpers. Santa Claus is an amalgamation of various figures, including Saint Nicholas, Christian bishop Odin, Norse god who flew through the sky with an 8-legged horse, Father Christmas. British embodiment of holiday cheer, Santa's elves, however, were Victorian invention. First popularized in American magazines like God's Ladies Book 1850s, they were described as small childlike creatures who helped build toys. And workshops at the North Pole. These elves had pointy ears and festive hats, lived cheerfully away from human society, were non-threatening and cartoonish. The transformation into jolly toy makers marked a complete reversal of ancient elven lore. Once divine and feared, elves were now domesticated, stripped of ambiguity, and rebranded for commercial holiday joy. 6. Elves in modern fantasy and gaming. Modern fantasy has largely built on Tolkien's legacy, but also added new variations. Elves in contemporary media tend to fall into two broad types. 1. High fantasy elves seen in works like The Witcher, Warcraft, Dungeons and Dragons, and Elder Scrolls, typically long-lived or immortal, divided into sub-races: high elves, noble, dark elves. Cursed or corrupted with elves, nature-aligned, possess magic, heightened senses, and a deep connection to the earth or stars. 2. Urban and dark fantasy elves, often seductive, morally ambiguous, or corporate, appear in series like the Dresden Files, the Iron Druid Chronicles, or Holly Black's Folk of the Air. Navigate between worlds or influence modern society from the shadows. In both genres, elves are powerful and dangerous, but less godlike than their mythic ancestors. They often represent the last remnants of magic in a fading world. 7. Symbolism and cultural meaning. Across time and tradition, elves have symbolized nature's power and mystery as guardians of forests and hills, beauty and danger, enchanting, yet unpredictable. The spiritual other, beings that dwell between life and death, human and divine. Loss and nostalgia, especially in romantic and fantasy literature. They are liminal beings who test boundaries between worlds, between moral codes, and between what is seen and what is felt. The versatility of the elf archetype is part of its staying power. Elves can be whatever a culture needs them to be: protectors, punishers, artists, lovers, warriors, or clowns. From Norse epics to holiday commercials, elves have walked an extraordinary path through cultural consciousness. Their image has been recast over and over. Gods, ghosts, tricksters, toys, but always with one foot in the mythic. In them, we see our deepest dreams and fears reflected about nature, the unknown, time, and transcendence. They are echoes of a forgotten world where magic was real, consequences immediate, and wonder ever present, even now as they grace screens, shelves, and stories. Elves remind us of the human need to believe in something beyond the veil. A shimmering figure watching from the trees, waiting to bless or to test. Trolls loom large in the folklore of Northern Europe, literally and metaphorically. These giant beings are often depicted as primitive, powerful, and deeply connected to nature and the rugged wilderness. But behind their hulking forms lies a rich mythology that reflects ancient fears, beliefs, and the clash between civilization and the wild unknown. Trolls have been described as mountain giants, bridge dwellers, cave creatures, and even shapeshifters, sometimes dim-witted and slow, sometimes cunning and cruel. They occupy a unique space in Scandinavian and Norse folklore as beings who dwell beyond the bounds of human society. This section explores the many faces of trolls, their ancient origins, their transformation through Christianization, their enduring role in Scandinavian culture, and their depiction in modern media, origins, and mythological foundations. The earliest accounts of trolls stem from Norse mythology, where they are sometimes indistinguishable from Jotnar giants in the Poetic Edda and Prosetta. Giants represent elemental forces, chaos, nature, and the opposition to the gods. Some scholars argue that the word troll initially functioned as a general term for supernatural beings, not just a specific race. In early Norse tales, trolls could be massive and terrifying. Dwelling in mountains or isolated wilderness, they were often antagonists of the gods, particularly Thor, who famously battled them with his hammer, Mjolnir. Over time, trolls evolved into distinct folkloric creatures. Unlike the divine genre, trolls became more closely associated with the land, mountains, forests, and bridges, acting as territorial guardians, and spirits of the wild, physical appearance, and traits. Descriptions of trolls vary widely depending on the region and time period, but some common features include large size. Trolls are often described as enormous, towering over humans, grotesque appearance. Many have twisted faces, tusks, large noses, and animal-like features, stone-like skin. In some stories, trolls turn to stone when exposed to sunlight, a trait likely tied to ancient stone monuments and natural rock formations. Solitary nature. Trolls are usually loners or sometimes live in small family units. Connection to the land. They are deeply rooted in their surroundings, bound to specific hills, mountains, or caves. Despite their fearsome appearance, trolls are not always evil. Some stories depict them as merely reclusive or protective of their territory, attacking only when provoked. Trolls and Christianity. With the Christianization of Scandinavia, trolls underwent a significant transformation. They became associated with heathenism, darkness, and evil. Christian monks and storytellers reinterpreted trolls as demons or enemies of God. Churches were often built near sites associated with trolls, as symbolic acts of conquest over pagan forces. This period also introduced new motifs: trolls throwing stones at churches, explaining boulders in odd locations, priests outwitting trolls with holy water or crosses, trolls kidnapping Christian women or attempting to destroy sacred buildings. These stories help reinforce the power of Christianity by portraying it as superior to the old gods and spirits. Troll bridges, troll mountains, and place lore. Trolls are frequently connected to geographic landmarks in Norway, Sweden, and Iceland. Numerous place names reference trolls: Troll Tonga, Troll's Tongue, Troll Jordan, Troll Fjord, and Troll Vegan, Troll Wall, among many others. These locations often have legends explaining how the landscape was shaped by troll activity. A troll chasing a Christian and turning to stone at dawn. A troll bride whose veil became a waterfall. A troll throwing rocks across a valley in anger. Such stories reflect an ancient tendency to mythologize the land, assigning spiritual significance to its features. Trolls and folktales. Trolls feature prominently in Scandinavian folktales, particularly in collections like Ask Json and Moe's Norwegian Folktales 19th century. Common themes include trolls as obstacles. Heroes must outwit or defeat trolls to rescue princesses, win treasure or gain wisdom. Bridges and riddles. Trolls guard crossings and challenge travelers, as in the tale of the Free Billy Goat's Gruff. Trolls and humans. Trolls kidnap, marry, or trick humans, but are usually outsmarted by cleverness or faith. These stories reinforce the idea of trolls as tests of character, representing wild forces that can be tamed or defeated by courage, wit, or divine help. Troll magic and powers. Though often seen as brutish, trolls also possess magical abilities. Shape-shifting. Some can disguise themselves as animals or humans. Enchantment. Trolls may place curses or create illusions. Treasure hoarding. They guard magical items or vast riches hidden in caves. Longevity. Trolls are often ancient beings who live for centuries. These magical traits add depth to the troll archetype, making them more than just monsters, but ancient mystical entities. Modern representations. In the 20th and 21st centuries, trolls have made their way into popular culture. Children's literature. Trolls appear in books like The Hobbit, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Frozen Disney. Fantasy and gaming. Trolls in Dungeons and Dragons, The Witcher, World of Warcraft, and Elder Scrolls vary widely. Some are brutish, others noble or shamanistic. Horror and mockumentary films like Troll Hunter 2010 return trolls to their mythic, terrifying roots. Internet trolls. A modern metaphorical usage where troll refers to someone who causes disruption online, a reflection of their role as antagonists. Despite these different depictions, the core concept remains. Trolls represent the disruptive force, the wild, the unknown, the challenge that must be faced. Symbolism and cultural role. Trolls symbolize nature's power and indifference, the boundary between civilization and wilderness, fear of the other, spiritual residue of pre-Christian beliefs. In many ways, trolls are the embodiment of fear, of getting lost in the forest, of wandering too far from home, of encountering something ancient and beyond understanding. Yet they are also guardians of myth, anchoring cultural memory in the land. They are reminders of a time when every rock had a story, every mountain of spirit. In nearly every culture, the belief in spirits, those ethereal beings that occupy the space between the living and the dead, forms a core part of folklore. These entities may be seen as messengers, guardians, wanderers, or even malevolent forces, but all share one thing in common. They exist just beyond the veil in a realm invisible yet ever-present. This section explores the spirit world through the lens of ancient and global folklore, tracing how cultures understood the soul, the afterlife, hauntings, ancestral reverence, and the metaphysical boundary known as the veil. Ancient beliefs about the soul and the afterlife. The earliest human societies grappled with the mysteries of death and the fate of the soul. Burial sites from tens of thousands of years ago show signs of ritual suggesting a belief in an afterlife. Grave goods, offerings, and careful burial positioning all point to a spiritual cosmology. In ancient Egypt, the soul was made up of several parts, including the ka, vital essence, and ba, personality, which could live on after death. The afterlife, ruled by Osiris, was a mirror of earthly life, but only for those who pass moral judgment. In Greek mythology, souls journeyed to the underworld, ruled by Hades, guided by Hermes, and fed by Charon. The dead retained consciousness and personality, but lived a shadowy existence unless granted honor through heroic deeds. Chinese ancestor worship believed that spirits of the dead could influence the living, bringing fortune or misfortune depending on how well they were honored. These early beliefs laid the foundation for concepts of spirits, beings who, though departed, linger close to the human world. The veil, a boundary between worlds. The idea of the veil is symbolic of the thin boundary separating the material world from the spiritual. It is believed that at certain times or in certain places this veil becomes thinner, allowing spirits to cross over or mortals to glimpse the beyond. Common moments when the veil is considered thinnest include Halloween, the Celtic festival, marking the end of the harvest season where spirits were believed to walk among the living. Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, a Mexican tradition celebrating deceased ancestors with food altars and offerings. Twilight hours and liminal spaces, crossroads, thresholds, dawn, and dusk are all moments when the veil is thought to thin. These beliefs illustrate a profound cultural awareness of liminality, states of transition where ordinary rules break down and magic seeps through. Ghosts, restless spirits of the departed. The most familiar type of spirit in folklore is the ghost, a soul trapped between worlds due to trauma, unfinished business, or improper burial. In Japanese folklore, ghosts are known as yuri, often depicted with long black hair, white funeral garments, and haunted expressions. They appear in no-theater ghost stories and modern horror films. In Slavic traditions, spirits of those who died violently or without proper rites became rusalka, female water spirits, or nav, souls of the unquiet dead. In Western Europe, ghost stories flourished during the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Haunted castles, ghostly monks, and headless horsemen became common tropes. Ghosts often serve as warnings, reminders to live morally, honor the dead, or respect sacred boundaries. Ancestral spirits, guardians, and guides. Not all spirits are feared. Many traditions honor the dead as protectors or advisors. Ancestral veneration is common across Africa, Asia, Polynesia, and the Americas. In West African Vodun, ancestors are part of a spiritual continuum. They are consulted through ritual and possession. In Shinto, Japan, the spirits of ancestors are enshrined in household altars and honored through festivals. In Native American belief systems, ancestors are often seen as part of the natural world present in animals, trees, or dreams. Such spirits are invoked for blessings, wisdom, and protection. They maintain continuity between generations, reminding the living that they are never alone. Spirit intermediaries, shamans, mediums, and witches. Throughout history, some individuals have claimed the ability to cross the veil and communicate with spirits. These figures, often called shamans, mediums, or witches, play a crucial role in bridging worlds. Shamans in Siberian, Mongolian, and native traditions enter trance states to journey into spirit realms. Mediums in 19th century spiritualism perform seances claiming to speak with the dead. Oracles and sibyls in ancient Greece channel messages from divine or ancestral spirits. These practices reflect a belief that certain people are born sensitive to the unseen, acting as conduits for divine or ancestral wisdom or danger. Malevolent spirits, possession, curses, and nightmares. While many spirits are benign or helpful, folklore abounds with tales of malevolent spirits that harm the living. Dybbuk in Jewish folklore are malicious spirits that possess living people. Mara in Norse mythology are night spirits that sit on chests and cause sleep paralysis. Poltergeists are chaotic spirits known for moving objects, making noise, or frightening inhabitants. These beings often emerge in times of stress, illness, or moral disorder, representing the psychic and social shadows of a culture. Protective charms and rituals. To guard against harmful spirits, cultures developed a vast array of protective measures: salt, iron, and bells to repel spirits, amulets and talismans worn for spiritual shielding, cleansing rituals including smoke, incense, and water, exorcisms in religious traditions. These reflect both spiritual belief and psychological reassurance, empowering people against the unknown. Spirits in modern culture. The spirit world continues to fascinate modern minds. Ghost hunting shows and paranormal podcasts explore haunted sites. Psychic mediums still conduct readings and channel the dead. Fantasy and horror genres use spirits to explore identity, trauma, and the afterlife. While science has challenged traditional spirit beliefs, the emotional and symbolic power of the unseen persists. Ghost stories remain a way to process grief, mystery, and our own mortality. Symbolism and meaning. Spirits represent memory of those lost and the stories they left behind. Mystery, the unknowable aspects of existence. Warning, to live ethically and respect the dead. Connection to family, culture, and place. They serve as mirrors and messengers, revealing hidden truths and guiding human behavior through awe and fear. While goblins, fairies, trolls, elves, and spirits are often categorized by region or tradition, their essential themes echo across the globe. These mythical beings reveal universal human concerns about nature, morality, death, fear, and the mystery of existence. Despite geographic distance and cultural difference, there is a striking similarity in the roles these creatures play. In this final section, we compare beings from global mythologies to those already discussed, revealing how humanity has developed shared archetypes for interpreting the supernatural, tricksters and troublemakers around the world. Goblins may be European in origin, but the archetype of the mischievous troublemaker is widespread. Kitsune Japan, fox spirits, who can be wise protectors or deceptive tricksters. Much like goblins or fairies, they can play tricks, cause madness, or bless those they favor. Coyote. Native American, a sacred trickster who creates, destroys, deceives, and enlightens. Loki. Northo, a god. Loki plays the same archetypal role of a shapeshifter and cowspringer. Puck, Roaring Goodfellow. English folklore similar to goblins and fairies. Puck is a house spirit prone to pranks and mischief. These figures challenge order, blur boundaries, and force societies to confront their own contradictions. They are both beloved and feared. Guardians of nature and sacred places. Many cultures feature beings who protect forests, rivers, and mountains. Yaksha and Yakshini. Indian nature spirits who guard treasures and natural sites. Benevolent or wrathful depending on how they're treated. Kadama, Japan. Tree spirits believed to inhabit old or sacred trees. Dryads, Greece. Nymphs of the trees who suffer if their host trees are harmed. Chanax, Mexico. Small forest spirits that protect natural places and trick those who disrespect them. These creatures echo elves and fairies in their connection to the natural world and their role as guardians of balance. Shadowy spirits and the dead. The idea of spirits who linger between life and death is nearly universal. But India. Restless ghosts who died with unfulfilled desires or sudden deaths. Pa. Buddhism. Hungry ghosts doomed to wander never satisfied. Llorona. Latin America. The weeping woman who searches for her lost children haunting riverbanks and towns. Jangir China reanimated corpses who drained the life force of the living. Like Western ghosts, these spirits often serve as warnings or reflect cultural taboos about death, honor, and grief, fair folk and other worldly beings. Elves and fairies have counterparts across cultures who exist in parallel or hidden realms. City. Celtic fairy folk who live in the other world and can be benevolent or deadly. Tien. Vietnamese mythology. Celestial beings who descend to earth, sometimes falling in love with mortals. Apsaras. Hindu and Buddhist traditions. Divine nymphs who dance for the gods and sometimes interact with humans. Tengu. Japan's supernatural birdmen with both protective and dangerous traits, dwelling in forests and mountains. These beings illustrate a belief in overlapping realms where time flows differently and contact with humans can be transformative or tragic. Changelings and child stealers. A recurring motif across folklore is that of the stolen child, a narrative often associated with elves and fairies. Changelings, Europe fairy replacements left in place of abducted children. Tekolash, Zulu folklore, a malevolent dwarf-like spirit blamed for illness, misfortune, and sometimes child deaths. Aswang, Philippines, shape-shifting creatures that prey on children and unborn infants. Pontianak, Malaysia, Indonesia, the spirit of a woman who died in childbirth, sometimes said to abduct children. These tales reflect deep cultural anxieties about vulnerability, motherhood, and the mystery of early childhood illness or death. Hybrid monsters and misunderstood beings. Not all monstrous beings are purely evil. Many serve moral or symbolic functions. Wendigo, a Lankian legend, a spirit of greed and cannibalism representing excess and moral decay. Roshasa, Hindu mythology, demon-like beings with complex roles. Some are evil, others noble. Oni, Japanese folklore, ogre-like demons that punish the wicked, but also guard temples and gates. Golem, Jewish folklore, a creature made from clay, animated to serve and protect, but prone to chaos when uncontrolled. These beings mirror trolls, goblins, and other chaotic entities that test human strength, virtue, or humility. Archetypes and shared themes across global folklore. A few recurring themes emerge. Liminality. Many beings exist on boundaries between life and death, forest and village, day and night. Reciprocity. Spirits reward respect and punish arrogance. Duality. Few beings are entirely good or evil. They reflect the complexity of nature and humanity. Memory and place. Mythic beings are often tied to specific locations, preserving cultural identity and moral lessons. These commonalities suggest that folklore is a kind of collective dreaming shaped by environment, history, and existential fear. Folklore as a cultural mirror. While the names and appearances differ, these beings reveal how cultures cope with universal truths. The unpredictability of nature, the fragility of life, the importance of boundaries and respect, the presence of unseen forces. Folklore doesn't just entertain. It teaches, warns, connects, and heals. Through goblins, fairies, trolls, spirits, and others, we encounter reflections of our own hopes, fears, and questions. Despite cultural differences, ancient folklore reveals a shared symbolic language. Whether whispered in Nordic forests, danced in Indian temples, sung by African griots, or painted in indigenous art, the stories all echo one another. They remind us that the world is not only what we see, but also what we feel, fear, and imagine. Through these beings, ancient and global, we recognize ourselves and each other more deeply. The goblin in the cave, the elf in the glade, the spirit by the river. They are part of a universal mythos that binds us all across time, space, and story. From forest-dwelling trolls to moonlit fairies, from spectral spirits to cunning goblins, the tales explored throughout this work reflect more than simple entertainment. They are fragments of human understanding layered with wisdom, warning, and wonder. Ancient folklore served not merely to scare or amuse, but to communicate profound truths about the world, morality, and the unseen forces believed to shape everyday life. At their heart, these stories offered moral guidance, weather warning against arrogance through the downfall of a prideful hero, or encouraging hospitality through the appearance of a disguised spirit. Folklore taught values in ways that transcended dry commandments, elves, fairies, and spirits could reward kindness and punish cruelty, not because they were moral judges, but because they reflected the belief that actions had consequences even in unseen realms. Folklore also provided psychological tools for processing fear and uncertainty. Death, illness, natural disasters, and misfortune were often attributed to supernatural causes. Trolls might explain the danger of mountain paths, while changing stories gave voice to the grief and confusion of losing a child to illness. In a world where science was scarce and life precarious, these tales offered meaning amid mystery. In addition, many stories encoded environmental ethics. Spirits tied to rivers, forests, and mountains were guardians of nature, punishing those who took more than they needed or failed to give thanks. These tales embedded respect for the natural world into culture, reminding communities that survival depended on harmony, not domination. In this way, folklore preserved not just beliefs, but sustainable behaviors. The recurring idea of liminality, beings who exist between categories such as life and death, human and divine, reality and dream, also served a purpose. It reflected the human experience of the in-between, adolescence, grief, migration, transformation. These stories allowed people to navigate change by personifying its emotional and spiritual dimensions. Moreover, these stories forged social cohesion. Shared tales built a sense of collective identity and belonging. They were told around fires, at festivals, in homes, and in rituals passed down from generation to generation. Through them, a culture reinforced its values, remembered its history, and connected its people across time. In many ways, folklore functioned as an early form of therapy and philosophy. The goblins stealing from your pantry, the troll under the bridge, the spirit at the window. Each story externalized inner fears, anxieties, and hopes. By naming and dramatizing them, communities could confront what otherwise might feel overwhelming or ineffable. Even today, we see echoes of these stories in modern narratives. From blockbuster films to bedtime stories, the archetypes remain. The hero's journey, the magical helper, the haunted house, the forbidden forest. These ancient patterns endure because they speak to something timeless in us, that the need to believe in more than what we can see, to explain what we do not understand, and to imagine worlds beyond our own. In the end, what these stories meant was this: we are never alone. The world is filled with mysteries and meanings, both seen and unseen, whether through spirits, fairies, goblins, or elves. Ancient folklore reminded us that the universe is alive with presence and possibility. That magic walks beside us just beyond the veil. Throughout history, human beings have told stories not just to entertain, but to illuminate the invisible forces that shape our world. In goblins, fairies, elves, trolls, and spirits, we glimpsed pieces of ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our longing for meaning in an uncertain world. These beings represent not merely mythic creatures, but symbolic truths cloaked in shadow and wonder. Folklore endures because it operates on multiple levels. It teaches morality through metaphor. It encodes survival strategies, spiritual wisdom, and communal values. It allows each generation to encounter the unknown with courage and creativity. In a world once darkened by forests and mystery, these stories were torches. Small lights passed from hand to hand, illuminating the path forward. Despite cultural differences, the persistence of similar beings across time and geography proves that certain truths are universal. The protective spirit, the wrathful ghost, the mischievous sprite, and the monstrous guardian all reveal our shared human condition. We seek to explain suffering, to rationalize the inexplicable, to teach children, and to define the boundaries of the sacred and the profane. Even today, in an age of science and technology, the unseen still holds sway. Ghost stories continue to thrill us. Fantasy realms populated with elves and trolls dominate our books, films, and games. People still leave offerings at sacred trees, whisper to the wind, or feel a chill when walking alone at night. This enduring relationship with the unseen reveals a fundamental truth. Folklore is not obsolete. It is evolving. The stories we inherit are not meant to be sealed in books or preserved in museums alone. They live through retelling, through reinterpretation, and through belief. They ask us to pay attention to what is invisible, the feelings we suppress, the histories we inherit, the natural forces we forget to honor. In the end, folklore reminds us of one thing above all: the world is more alive than it seems. Every shadow may carry a tale, every whisper may be a warning, and every moment might just be touched by the timeless power of the unseen.